Well, I tell you what, this young man, I always tell people all the time, don't even try to take notes. You just, it's impossible. When him and his dad get to talking, you just set your notebook down and listen. And hopefully somebody's recording so you can go back, you know. But y'all honor Tim as he comes.
Thanks, sir. Appreciate you. Well, it's such a pleasure to always be with the Hilton family. Really enjoy spending time with them. And I'm going to start with a verse that I think is probably semi-familiar for us. From John 14:6, Jesus said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. So, first of all, the second sentence is a claim of exclusivity, that Jesus is the only way to the Father. One of the reasons that I think our country is in so much of the mess we are in is because right now, statistically, the majority of the Christians who go to church don't even believe that Jesus is the only way to the Father. Right? Statistically, polling from this year, we work with a lot of groups that do a lot of polling, and it's well over 50% of Christians that think that you don't have to go through Jesus to get to heaven, right? Because a loving God wouldn't send you somewhere else. So there's already this notion that even as Christians, we don't always think biblically. And one of the things that's important is if you look in the first sentence, Jesus says that he is truth. We have lost this notion of truth in culture. We've lost it inside of Christianity. We don't really appreciate the truth. We don't love the truth. We don't defend the truth. We don't respect the truth. And the reason that's a big problem inside of Christianity, Jesus said what truth actually does. He talked to disciples. He said, if you follow my words, you're my disciples indeed, and then you would know the truth, and the truth would set you free. The truth is supposed to bring freedom in our life. But you can't be set free from truth you don't know. And you can't be set free if you don't think truth exists. And we live in a culture that doesn't know that truth exists. In fact, as a Christian, if we don't acknowledge that truth exists, then the gospel means nothing to nobody. Because if it's, well, here's what truth is to me. Well, no, there is no your truth, my truth. There is the truth in our opinions, right? But truth does exist. So looking at culture, where a culture says that we're not sure that truth exists, right now, it is 80% of millennials, which I am the beginning of the millennial generation, so this is my people I'm talking about. 80% of millennials do not believe that absolute truth exists. What's crazy is it's over 50%, actually it's over 60% of Christians who don't believe absolute truth exists. Christians. We don't believe in truth anymore, which is why it's not super surprising when you look at what's happening in the world around us, where the world literally, sorry, my remote stopped working. Will you click on my computer screen? I don't know what happened. Okay, it's not surprising given the fact that whenever you read the news, right, it's boggling to me that now it doesn't even matter which outlet you watch, right? If you're a Fox or CNN, whoever you watch, it is boggling to me the things that people are saying, and I'm like, that's not actually true, right? Things that are being promoted. Why do we live in a culture that even the news is not interested in truth? Well, news outlets, bottom line, want to promote what's sensational, not just what's true, because they're trying to sell, right? They're trying to get ad revenue, and so what they want to do is to get the most clicks, the most likes, the most shares, right, that they possibly can. And so even news outlets are being dishonest, which is why part of what we're seeing happening around the nation, where cities are literally being set on fire. It is boggling to the mind how many of these riots started off of a false news report. Literally. Last month in Chicago, where they were burning the city down, it started because there was a report went out that a police officer shot an unarmed 13-year-old black boy. So they said, well, we can't have more police killing more unarmed black people. We're going to burn the city down. The next day, police released video footage that showed it was not an unarmed 13-year-old black boy. It was a 20-year-old man who was shooting at the police. Police returned fire, struck the suspect, he died. This wasn't some 13-year-old unarmed kid, but this is what the media reported. This is what was tweeted and was shared. It was all over social media. This is what is so crazy, is our nation is in so much duress, and largely goes back to the fact that nobody knows what's true. The media doesn't care what's true. They're just promoting what's sensational because they're getting more views and more ads and more revenue and everything else that's going on. If you back up several months ago, when coronavirus was just starting, one of the things also starting was people were saying, you know what we should tear down in America? Confederate statues, because they're racist. Now, beyond the fact that I think that's a really poor policy to tear down history, if you think somebody's racist, then tell the story of how they're racist. Use that for a history lesson. If you ever go to Israel, worth noting, outside the old city of Jerusalem, there's this massive cemetery on a hill. Do you know what the biggest monument in the cemetery is? It's to King David's son Absalom. If you don't know Absalom, he's not a hero from the Bible. Right? He's the one that tried to overthrow and take the throne from his father. He is the biggest monument, the biggest memorial in the whole cemetery is to Absalom. And it's worth noting, right? Why is the biggest, it's not to King David, it's not to Solomon. Why is the biggest one to Absalom? And what they will tell you over there is they don't even know who built it. Right? They're not sure, and I would argue, it's probably King David, because we know when Absalom died, David's heart was really grieved, so much so that his commander had to come to him and be like, dude, we lost men in this battle, quit feeling sorry about your son, and recognize the people that laid down their life for you to have your throne. Right? So I would think probably you would see where David might do this, but what they point out is that they don't need to do anything with it, because every time they see it, it lets them tell the story of the rebellion against David. It's interesting, right? We don't need to tear down a monument to pretend like that, well, no, if it's there, it's because we celebrate him. Nobody celebrates Absalom today, to my knowledge, in Israel. Right? In fact, everybody learns the story of Absalom, but this is what's crazy, is the movement was, we need to tear down all the statues of racist people. I understand the sentiment of let's be against racism. That's a good thing. Let's be against racism. Because the Apostle Paul says that in Christ, there is no Jew, there's Greek, there's no male, there's no female, there's no slave or free, we are all one in Christ. So I get the notion racism is bad, I'm against it too. But what quickly became apparent is we're not just targeting racists. One of the things that became very evident was in Washington, D.C., there was a memorial that was built to honor Abraham Lincoln, and it was built by people who had been former slaves. So there was a group of slaves who had been emancipated, and to honor Abraham Lincoln, known as the Great Emancipator, they raised their own money. So former slaves, they're now free, they raise money, and they build a statue to Abraham Lincoln to honor Abraham Lincoln. The first one was done in Washington, D.C. There's a duplicate monument built in Boston. The mayor of Boston came out several months ago and said, yeah, we're going to have to tear that down because it's a racist statue. It depicts a white man looking down on a black man. And you're like, hold up. This was actually built by black people. They paid for it to honor Abraham Lincoln, right? But what we started to see is that statues and monuments were being targeted that did not fit the narrative of the status quo, such as in Cleveland, Ohio, the statue and monuments to the Union soldiers, which if you're going to argue, right, Confederate statues are racist, then the argument is the Union soldiers are not the racists from the Civil War, but they said, no, because these are white people from history, therefore they must be racist. So the standard is shifting, right? It's not the Confederates, it's white people from history, and it goes even further because out in California, just a month or two ago, they tore down the statue of Ulysses S. Grant. And this is where you have to be just ignorant on different levels. Because if you remember the Civil War, when the Civil War unfolds, Lincoln tries to find a general who actually can help the Union be successful. And if you remember the context, right, before the separation, the dividing of the nation, we had one military, which means that all the military officers were going to school together at West Point. They all knew each other. They might not have all got along, but they all knew each other, and many of them were friends. And so when the nation divides, right, Lincoln goes to Robert E. Lee, says, hey, can you lead our military? And he says, if there's going to be a war, I can't lead an army against my family and my friends. I'm going to have to go with the South. But there's this split. So Lincoln's trying to find a general who actually will lead in victory. And Lincoln, this is very, very well documented history. Lincoln says that I can't find anybody because everybody simply wants to be friends in war. Enter Grant. Grant's like, I'll kill them all. I never liked him. We were never friends. Grant is the guy who brings the Union victory because he's not friends with any of the guys in the Confederacy. Okay? So this is not the guy you can argue was like the racist guy from the past. In fact, when he becomes president, every single piece of legislation done in the Reconstruction era to bring equality to blacks was done under him. Every single one. So how in the world are we arguing he's the racist? Because we don't know history, but we know he's a white guy from history, therefore he must have been racist. this is what we were seeing, and it started getting so bizarre that it moved from just white guys were bad to all things from history are bad, so much so that the Mass 54th Memorial, Mass 54th was the black regiment from the Civil War in the Union Army. They were the ones Frederick Douglass helped raise this regiment. He had 2 of his sons in the regiment, and this was at an era in American, but arguably world history, when there was a lot of question marks on a lot of the black people living in America. Of the argument was, well, they're not as brave, they're not as courageous, they're not as heroic, so we can't really trust them in the battle. Because of that, the Mass 54th Regiment received more training than any other regiment in the entire Civil War. When they finally took the battlefield, they proved to be one of the most heroic, courageous, incredible regiments there were. More Medal of Honor winners came out of the Mass 54th than any other regiment during the Civil War. So they were really an amazing regiment, and yet Black Lives Matter went and sprayed their step to black people. Like Black Lives Matter, which arguably at this point is probably like white Democrat kids who are going and targeting this monument to these black heroes. But this is what was going on, and so much so, it gets so bizarre, right? Even Frederick Douglass' statue was torn down. Frederick Douglass, former slave, becomes an abolitionist, fights against slavery in America, and so what became evident was this is not an anti-racist movement. This was a movement of we hate America, and we want to tear America down. Now, that's not super surprising given some of the Marxism that's being promoted in the nation today. When you look at the 1690 Project or the Black Lives Matter organization, it's interesting the organizational website had to take down their objectives because when people started finding out what they actually stood for, it was actually offensive to most Americans. But this is the point, is that in this notion of Marxism, everything from the past has to be portrayed as bad, because if it's not bad, then you can't replace it and do something different. So it's no surprise then, if you look at the Founding Father statues are being torn down. Okay, Caesar Rodney is on the corridor from Delaware. In Delaware, they tore down his statue. He's only famous for one thing. He rode a horse one time at night. That's it. Literally, that is all he is famous for. Delaware was one of the states that when we were at the Constitution, or excuse me, the Continental Congress, and they're trying to decide, can we separate from Great Britain? Delaware had 2 delegates who showed up. And one delegate was in favor and one was against. And John Hancock said that whatever we do has to be unanimous or we will not do it. So since Delaware wasn't in favor of it, they said, well, we can't celebrate or we can't separate if everybody's not in favor. So the guy in favor writes back to Caesar Rodney, who wasn't elected delegate, but he couldn't go because he had to work on the farm. And they said, hey, you have got to get here, because if you don't come and vote, we will not be able to separate from Great Britain. Caesar Rodney got word, got on a horse, rode the entire night on horseback from Delaware, shows up in Pennsylvania the next day. Okay, it's a pretty far ride. Showed up in time for the vote. He voted in favor, and so we were able to separate from Great Britain because he cast a deciding vote in favor of separation. Literally, the only reason he has a statue is because he rode a horse one time at night, and Delaware doesn't have that many heroes. So to tear down this guy, it's so bizarre. But what they argue is, well, he's a founding father, and the founding fathers created institutional racism, right? So therefore, they're all bad. So much like if you look at George Washington. Okay, George Washington is being targeted, and I understand people arguably as slaves. I get it. I really understand the argument. There's a lot more to that context, but let's pause for a second. The reason he has a statue is not because he was a slave owner. The reason he has a statue is because without George Washington, there would be no America. Literally. It was his leadership through the American Revolution that helped America win the Revolution. At the end of the Revolution, his officers came to him and said, hey, we don't trust Congress. They're all dumb. We think they're all corrupt and crooked. We want you to be in charge. And he says, we just fought a war to get out from under kings. We're not having a king. That was literally the reason we fought a war. He turns them down. He turns in his papers, like really this amazing, humble movement. He then is the guy, when we decide we're going to write a constitution, which happens just a couple years later, he is chosen to be the president of that convention, and without his leadership, the Constitution never would have been written. He then becomes the first president. He was the only president in American history ever elected unanimously. Process that for a second. Nobody voted against this dude. Okay? At the end of 2 terms, he resigns. He said, if you're president longer than 2 terms, it's likely you're a king, and you shouldn't be a king. He stepped down. In the era of monarchs, he showed how there could be a peaceful transfer of power. Literally, without this guy's leadership, there is no America. But today we say, no, he's a white guy from history, and he had slaves, therefore he's evil, we have to tear him down. You've confused the history of George Washington. Right? You've confused why he was celebrated. The same thing with Thomas Jefferson. Well, Thomas Jefferson's really bad. Thomas Jefferson, when he was 33 years old, wrote the Declaration of Independence, which was the first governing document in the history of the world to declare that all men were created equal. We were in an era when there was not only monarchs, there was lords, nobles, there was classes of people. And he said, regardless of your title, regardless of your position or station, all are created equal. This is an amazing thought. Now, we can go down the list of his accolades and accomplishments, but the point is, today people are saying, no. America is such a bad nation. And so the claims ultimately reside around the notion, my remote stopped working again. I'm not sure what's going on. It shouldn't need a battery. No, my laser works. There we go. Okay, let's see if it works. The claims ultimately reside around the fact that America is bad and the founding fathers were evil. So, here's where I always want to just help us think a little bit differently. If we back up, I'm always going to say, does the Bible offer guidance? Because if it does, it's the first place we should go to. Okay? In the Bible, you learn the story of King David. And when you learn the story of King David, you learn about the fact that he killed a lion, you learn about the fact he killed a bear, and we know he killed those because before he kills Goliath, Saul's like, I'm not sure I can trust you. He's like, no, it's fine. I've already killed lions and bears. Scholars believe he was between 14 and 17 years old when he killed Goliath, which means that he was killing lions and bears when he's 10, 11, 12, 13, in that range. Okay, now I want you to process this, right? Because growing up in Texas, I've hunted my whole life. You give me like my 300 Win Mag and you drop me in the woods and you're like, there's lions and bears, have fun, I'm still terrified. With a gun. David has a stick and a rock. And he's 11, 12, and 13 killing lions and bears. This guy is legitimately a very talented and very skilled hunter. Like legitimate, this dude's a warrior. Okay, he's very good at killing things, very good. Not only is he a great warrior, we know he's also a great worshiper, because when King Saul was troubled by evil spirits, David comes in, he plays the harp. David, right, helps Saul find peace. David writes the majority of the book of Psalms. This is a really good portion of David's life. But what's interesting is the Bible shows us a lot more of the story of David, and you learn about the humanity of David. You learn about his family, and actually what you learn is he's actually a pretty terrible father. Because if you study the story, for example, we can start with Amnon. Amnon is a son who has a crush on his sister. He rapes his sister. David does nothing. Okay? The Bible's pretty clear about this. David does nothing. Absalom's like, heck no, you raped my sister. Absalom goes and kills Amnon. Absalom says, my father's a terrible leader, he's a terrible king, I'm going to take over. Absalom tries to violently overthrow and take the throne from his father. Absalom finally gets his hair cut in a tree. David's men use him as javelin practice, and Absalom's done. Then enter Adonijah, and I encourage you, look up the story of Adonijah and read the very first verse on Adonijah in the Bible, because it starts like this. Adonijah, comma, the son whom David never corrected, comma, and it tells you his story. The son whom David never corrected as a parent. The question is not, have you ever corrected your kids? It's how many times a day are you correcting your kids? If you have a son that you never corrected, you are a terrible parent. The Bible tells us that a father disciplines the son he loves. That's why God disciplines us, right? If you've never disciplined, you are a terrible parent. Not only does the Bible show us that David was a really terrible parent, which is part of the bad of David, the Bible also tells us about a time when kings go to war, and David stayed home, and from his balcony, he looked out and saw a woman of unusual beauty who's bathing, right, has the affair with Bathsheba, she gets pregnant. He then has Uriah murdered. Okay, here's what's crazy about this. David is a really jacked up dude who did a lot of really, really bad things. So why do we celebrate King David? Why don't you process it for a second? Because what culture says, right, culture says, well, wait a second, King David has done so many bad things, and notice the Bible doesn't shy away from telling us bad things. The Bible actually does tell the whole story. It tells the good, the bad, and the ugly, and culture says, whoa, if there's bad and ugly, well, we can't celebrate people who have done bad things. This is what culture says. Well, how as Christians do we celebrate people who have done bad things? And here's the reality. As Christians, we always should look at things based on the Word of God, so our view should always look different than everybody else's view. The Word of God tells us very plainly that all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God, which means everybody is jacked up and needs Jesus. Everybody. So when you show me someone's jacked up, I'm like, yes, that is correct. Right? People look at somebody historically and they're like, wait a second. All of these people had issues. All of them did bad things. And this is why it's always interesting when someone's like, can you believe what they did? Yeah. Like, why would we ever be surprised by the flesh? It boggles my mind. That's right. Right? I mean, read Romans. Paul's like, okay, everything I want to do, I never do. And the things I never want to do, I always, like, everybody has the flesh. Galatians 5, you crucify the flesh, you walk in the Spirit. The flesh is never surprising. How then can we celebrate or honor people who have had really fleshly, sometimes even wicked or evil moments in their life? And let me go back to King David. Here's the reality. The reason we celebrate King David, or we can celebrate King David, is because we never celebrate the sin in his life. Instead, we celebrate how God used him in spite of his sin. Right? This is the reality of history, is we celebrate how a perfect God uses imperfect people and does great things through them. This is what we look at. So when someone's like, we can't celebrate them, they did something bad. Show me someone who didn't do something bad. The only name you come up with is Jesus. Right? And I'm happy to talk about him too. Like, we're friends, we hang out, let's talk about Jesus. But if we're talking historically, everybody was jacked up and needs Jesus, and this is our starting place with history. It's our starting place with people, it's our starting place with nations. In fact, if you go to Hebrews chapter 11, which is known as the Faith Hall of Fame, can you click on my computer again? I don't know what's, never mind, it seems working. It's so weird. The Faith Hall of Fame, if you look at the names listed, okay? I don't know when the last time you read this. If you look at the names of people that suggest maybe are heroes of the faith, it's not acting up. All right, yeah. Just hit the arrow for me if you don't mind. Okay, if you look at the people that are listed as heroes of the faith, and you think about their life, let me just walk you through this. Noah was a drunkard. Abraham was a liar. Moses was a murderer. Rahab was a prostitute. Samson was a womanizer. And David was a murdering adulterer and a terrible father. I want you to think about this. These are our heroes of the faith. Why? The author of Hebrews chose these people. Why are these heroes? And I would argue it's because God wants us to know there's hope for us. Because if God can use these people, he can use us too. There's great hope for us in the midst of this. And actually, let me show you one more thought. When you look at Noah, for example, right? One of the heroes of the faith. Noah, when the Bible introduces Noah, it says that he was a righteous man. And actually, it says he was blameless in his generation. And if you think about the days of Noah, there were so many problems. God's like, we're killing everybody, we're starting over. Like, that's a bad day, right? You know things are bad, but God says we're killing everybody. Noah is preserved. Noah's family's preserved, right? They build the ark, this really long project. The animals come. It rains 40 days and 40 nights. The water finally recedes. The ark lands at Mount Ararat. They get off. Genesis 9, God has this covenant with Noah, right? We know there's a rainbow in the sky. He's never going to flood the earth again. And the Noahic covenant comes about. Part of the Noahide laws come out of this. What's interesting, though, is if you go to Genesis 9, verse 19, it says that Noah was a farmer, and he planted a vineyard. Verse 20 tells us what he did with his vineyard. Right? It says he got drunk and he passed out naked. Righteous and blameless. When I think of righteous and blameless, I've never thought of a drunk and naked man. Right? Like, how is this righteous and blameless? But here's what's interesting. If you actually go back and look at the Hebrew doesn't say this exact translation. The Hebrew, and there's actually context in the English language to give us some perspective. It says he was blameless in his generation. The Hebrew says that Noah was more righteous than everyone in his generation. He was more blameless than everyone in his generation. It didn't say that he was righteous with no sin. It says he was more righteous, is what the Hebrew actually says. Why does that matter? Because what happens today is so often we judge people out of the context of the time in which they live. It is easy for us to look back even at a Noah and be like, dude, what were you thinking, right? That's a terrible idea. Okay, in the context of the time when he was living in, he was the most righteous man there was. And this is what's interesting, because we look back historically, and it's easy for us to judge people out of the context of their time. George Washington, we can look back and go, oh, he never should have had slaves. Except, at that time in world history, name a leader who didn't have slaves. And I would argue that when you judge people in the context of the time in which they lived, George Washington was not perfect, obviously, right? He's like the Noah, he's the David. He wasn't a perfect guy. And yet I also would argue that when you judge him in the context of the time in which he lived, that he was the most honorable, or one of the most honorable people that you will find in the United States of America for that era of history. And the people around him thought the same thing about him. They thought he's more special, he's different, he's not like the rest of us. But this is what we lose in even studying history, this notion that it's not about being perfect, it is being different. Looking at America, the argument people say today, like again with this argument of racism and slavery, one of the arguments is that America is today, like today we are racist and we were built by slaves. This is not a conjecture that I'm just assuming right now. These are articles from the last couple of months, where articles are literally saying America was built by slaves. There was a Democrat congressman this year, in the spring, who said that actually America created slavery. Like, even if you are biblically illiterate and you don't know about like Joseph's brother sold into slavery or Exodus, when the Israelites were enslaved to Moses, even if you didn't know Bible history, how could you not learn about the Greeks or the Romans? Right? Like, how you miss world history? But this is the argument being said, is that America is like this huge perpetuator of slavery. In fact, the argument is that slavery was bigger in America than any other nation in our founding. Literally is the argument. Now, the argument is being proposed by many at the 1619 Project, which was part of the New York Times. If you're not familiar with that project, it is a really terrible project. The argument is that America was birthed in 1619 when the first load of slaves arrived to Jamestown in America, and that's when slavery entered into American society. It's not totally true, but that's the argument. And then they say that everything in America was built because of slavery. Now, that is the argument being said today. The 1619 Project received the Pulitzer Prize, and then it's been embraced by almost every single board of education in almost every single state, and it's actually being used as part of curriculum in public schools all over the United States, including Texas. So this is the argument, is that, well, slavery is what built America, and part of their argument is that slavery is bigger in America than anywhere else in the world, therefore we are more evil than anywhere else in the world. So let me just walk back for a second, and let me give a little perspective, because first of all, what you have to know is America was not a world leader in the global slave trade. And it's like not even close. And this is something that is not even historically debated. Also, back up to the 1619 Project of the New York Times, when this was coming out, the New York Times hired several liberal history professors. That's important. They were not Christians, they were not conservatives. They were liberal by their own affirmation history professors. Even they said, what you're writing is totally historically inaccurate. And the editor said that, well, it's okay if it's not totally accurate because I'm not trying to be accurate, I'm trying to change the modern narrative. She's on record. I'm not trying to be accurate, I'm trying to change the narrative. Well, you're changing the narrative, that's true. We're just changing it with lies, and that's a problem. Okay? So if you look at this, go back to the North Atlantic slave trade, the African slave trade. One of the things that is significant about this, they have documentation for all of these ships that were leaving out of Africa. Can you click on the computer again for me? So when you see all this red coming out of Africa, the African slave trade went from 1501 to 1875. Roughly 12.7 million slaves came out of Africa. And again, they've been able to document the ships that were involved. Even they have found logs and rosters from the ship. So they actually have numbers from the ships involved, which is where these estimates come from. And this is not something that is historically debated. Okay? People on both sides of the aisle agree these are the numbers. This is accurate. Why that matters is when you look at the numbers, what you see is of the people that left Africa and went to other continents, 43% went to Portugal and Brazil, 24% went to Great Britain, 15% went to Spain, 11% went to France, 5% went to the Dutch, 2.5% went to the United States, and 1% went to Denmark. Now, what we can know is that America did participate in something that we can agree was a very evil thing. Okay? Kidnapping people and selling them into slavery, very evil. Okay? Now, there's a whole lot of context in the midst of that too, because there was already an intercontinental African slave trade where, for the history of humanity, people were conquering other people, and they were, at that point, either your two options were you kill them or you enslave them. So they were enslaving people, but then you had like the Dutch and the Portuguese, and you had Muslims in North Africa who started saying, hey, we will pay you for all the slaves you bring to us. So this is what kind of birthed the slave trade, and then they started taking people off to other continents and other areas. But in the midst of this, the argument is that America did more evil than anybody else. America got 2.5%. Why does nobody ever mention Portugal or Brazil? Like literally, I've never seen a history or an article mention Portugal and Brazil. America got 300,000 slaves. Portugal and Brazil got more than 4.5 million slaves.
Why are we pretending like America? Now, again, America participated. That was bad. We participated in an evil. Yes, that is true. But there's so much more to the story, and part of the story that is left out is the fact that slavery was a global condition. If you look historically, you cannot name a nation in their history that never had slaves and that never was enslaved. Every single people group, every single nation, that is part of their nation's story and is part of their history. This is humanity. Because this is what fallen, sinful, broken people do, and it starts all the way back in Genesis. And actually, it hasn't even stopped today, but I'll get to that in a second. What's interesting is that looking at America, again, America participated in this great evil, but America also was the very first nation in the history of the world to ban the slave trade. Thomas Jefferson signed the law in March 2nd, 1807. First nation in the world to ban the slave trade. We were the fourth nation in the world to actually ban slavery. Okay? 1865 is when we had the 13th Amendment, ended slavery in America. England did it in 1833. Then Denmark did it, then France did it. America was fourth. At that time in the world, there were 124 nations. We were number 4. Which means we were still at the very beginning of the world in ending slavery. So we started before anybody else banning the slave trade. I would argue that we actually paid a higher price ending slavery because it came at the end of the Civil War, where more than 600,000 people died in the midst of this incredibly bloody conflict and battle. And it's interesting that looking at the fact that we've ended slavery in America, slavery still exists around the world. And a lot of people today don't understand the extent of which it does exist. There's 193 member nations that were part of the UN this year. Of those 193 member nations, 94 of those nations still have not passed laws to criminalize slavery. It is legal in 94 nations, and it's still active in many nations. There's actually estimated more than 40 million people enslaved today. In Africa, there's more than 9.2 million people today in slavery. Over in China, slavery is legal. Right? India, slavery is legal. Middle East, slavery is legal. This is still happening in many nations today. What's also interesting is this map is done by the Global Slave Trade kind of initiative. They're fighting against it, and so they're documenting where does this happen, who are the worst people in promoting slavery and continuing slavery, but they also document who are the people doing the most to fight against this. And you see over here on the left, government taking action, and this is the most action. Number 1 is the Netherlands, number 2 is the United States of America. Even today, America is doing more to oppose slavery than any other nation arguably in the world. So what you can know is America started sooner, America paid a higher price, and America does more today than every other nation in the world against slavery. And yet, what we are saying is that America is really, really evil because of slavery. We've lost a lot of the story in the context. One of the things the Apostle Paul said is whatever is true, you should think on these things. The problem is we don't know what's true, we don't teach what's true, and we don't even care what's true for most people anymore. That's good. We come to the place that we care about our side winning, we care about our agenda being accomplished. It's Machiavellian that the end justifies the means, and as long as we can get Marxism, as long as we can get socialism, we don't even care what's true anymore. And this is where as Christians we have to think a lot different about this. And part of what we think different about is that as we look back historically, people are like, no, America messed up, America did bad. Our starting place is that, of course, America messed up and did bad because there were people in America. And that's why every nation will always have sin and wickedness and evil in it, because there are people. And apart from Jesus, our hearts, that's all it is. It's sin, wicked, and evil apart from Jesus. But when we look historically, what we see in America almost more than any other nation, and what we are able to celebrate is how a perfect God used imperfect people and did great things through them. And this is one of the amazing things about the story of America, so much so that if you look at what people argue are the bad things that happened in America, here's my question. When people say, well, but America did this, therefore we're bad. The only question I care about, how did that bad thing stop in America? What made it come to an end? And this is important. Because you name any atrocity you want to in American history. And what I can show you documented is that the reason it ended in America was because of the Christians, the pastors, and the churches who stood up to fight against it. You pick any atrocity you want. And this is why America has always been one of the first and one of the best because of the church, because of Christianity, because of what God has done raising up imperfect people, but using them to do great things. And let me finish. I want to tell you just a couple of stories real quick about some imperfect people who did some pretty special things. One guy that I think you will recognize and are familiar with, and we're going to have this computer figured out before tomorrow. So John Quincy Adams was the son of John Adams, grew up during the American Revolution. You might have heard me talk about him before. When he was 8 years old, the Massachusetts Minutemen used to go and practice their musket drills in front of John Adams' house. And in the midst of doing that, which, by the way, the Massachusetts Minutemen back then were like the best thing America had. Wasn't super special, but it was the best we had back then. Okay? And when he was 8 years old, his dad gave him a musket and said, I want you to go train with him. Now, as a country boy growing up, I had a single-shot, bolt-action Marlin 22 rifle when I was 8 years old. Okay, I was still learning gun safety. When I was probably 10 or 11, my dad would give me a handful of 22 ammo, put it in my pocket. He'd say, go play, I'll see you tonight, right? Like, that's epic childhood growing up. But I'm just telling you, right, if you have a boy and you're like, son, here's the deal. I got a bunch of Navy SEALs outside. Here's the gun, go play, we'll see you later. Like, that's Father of the Year candidate forever. Right? Like, that is awesome. So when he's 8 years old, he's training with the Massachusetts Minutemen. When he's 11 years old, he gets assigned a congressional appointment. He is the actual secretary to part of the diplomatic staff going over to negotiate the end of the war of the American Revolution. When he is 14 years old, he gets assigned to go before the throne of captain, the greatest part of the diplomatic staff. As a 14-year-old, his job on the diplomatic team is he's the interpreter. He was already fluent in 6 languages as a 14-year-old. So like, pretty sharp kid growing up. As he continues growing up, when George Washington becomes president, he grew up knowing every founding father. He knew them all. George Washington is president. He knows that John Quincy Adams is really smart. He chooses him to be a diplomat for America. George Washington said that John Quincy Adams was the best diplomat America ever had. So use him for every major deal. When John Adams becomes president, John Quincy Adams again is America's top diplomat. Under Thomas Jefferson, John Quincy Adams was elected to be a U.S. Senator, served a term in the Senate. Then James Madison becomes president and said, I really need you to come help and be an ambassador again. He was the guy who actually negotiated the end of the War of 1812. While he was negotiating that, he was appointed by James Madison to the U.S. Supreme Court, was confirmed by the Senate, but he turned it down because he said, what I'm doing here, ending the war, is way more important, and the Supreme Court's not important, and nobody cares about it. Interesting. You've kind of swung the other direction today, but under James Madison, he is again America's top ambassador. Under James Monroe, he then is elected to be the Secretary of State. He then became the 6th President of the United States of America. After being president, which already his resume is one of the most impressive in American history. After being president, he said that there's a great evil in America that needs to be remedied, and he went back and he got elected as a congressman because he wanted to see this evil remedied. It was the evil of slavery. He became the leader of the anti-slavery movement in America, specifically in Congress. They gave him the nickname the Hellhound of Abolition in Congress because this was his issue that he cared the most about. He fought against slavery every single day. He was in Congress for 17 years. As he fought against slavery for 17 years, he said when he first got elected, Congress was 80% pro-slavery. So he had a major uphill battle, but he's fighting against slavery. And as he fights against slavery, he's there for 6 years and 7 years and 8 years and 9 years and 10 years. And one day a reporter came to him and said, Mr. Adams, you've been fighting against slavery for so many years, and there have been no visible signs of success for you. Like, there's no legislation you can point to and be like, boom, that's a win, that was what I was working for. The reporter said, how do you stay motivated when you've never really been successful? First of all, it's an insulting question. But that's a really valid question, right? Like, how do you stay motivated? And his answer, he said, was based on his life motto. He wrote his journal. Life motto was, duty is ours, results are God's. He said that his answer to the reporter, he said, the reason I stay motivated when I haven't been successful, he said, because it's only up to me to do the right thing. It's up to God what happens after that. Okay, that's a really great perspective. Well, he kept going, and he fought in Congress for 17 years against slavery. As he's fighting against this, every 2 years you have to run for re-election, and so every 2 years there's new congressmen coming in, there's old congressmen going out. His last term in Congress, there's a young freshman who gets elected. His first term, for this young freshman, and this is John Quincy Adams' last term because actually as he's there his last term, he has a stroke. He actually died in the Capitol building. And so his last term in Congress is this young freshman's term, but John Quincy Adams, as a leader of the anti-slavery movement, every day he's giving these crazy speeches against slavery, how bad it is, and this young freshman joins the anti-slavery movement. He hears all these speeches. He's so impressed. He wants to be part of the team. He joins, and so he goes on for these 2 years fighting against slavery. Well, at the end of 2 years, you always run for re-election if you're in Congress. So he ran for re-election, and he got defeated. He said, that's okay, I'm going to run again. He ran again and got defeated. He said, well, let me try in the Senate. He ran for the Senate, got defeated. He then ran for state office and got defeated. This young freshman did not get elected for another position until he became the President of the United States of America. And when Abraham Lincoln gets elected, Abraham Lincoln is the leader in America that helps bring an end to slavery. Okay, you see with Emancipation Proclamation, and then you see with 13th Amendment things going on. What's crazy about this, Lincoln is known as the great emancipator. He's known as the guy that ends slavery, but I would point out that everything that Lincoln was trying to do, the only reason Lincoln learned what he learned was because of the work and the influence of a guy named John Quincy Adams. Why that matters is when you look at the legacy of, and they're working on my clicker. Yep, it's coming. Okay, if you look at John Quincy Adams, he fought his entire life for something that he never saw happen. But little did he know that he actually mentored the guy who would fulfill the vision that God gave him. It's interesting because for many of us, right, God gives us something in our heart and we want to see it happen. And for some of us, God might use us to actually get that accomplished. But for some of us, God might put that burden there so that we can pass that burden on to others so they can carry that towards vision and continue to move the ball down the field until it gets accomplished. And what's interesting about both these guys, both Abraham Lincoln and John Quincy Adams, both of them were people unquestionably were jacked up and needed Jesus. Like, not Abraham Lincoln's life, that dude was one of the best sinners when he was in youth. Like, literally, if you study his life, that dude was jacked up. And yet there's no question that God used him in really impressive ways to do something really special. And this is one of the things that we forget in modern culture, is that when we look at history, we're not celebrating people that we think are perfect. We're celebrating the moments when God used him to do something really special, and that's what we're celebrating, the moment of God using an imperfect person to do something great through them. Let me give you one more example as we finish this. Dwight Eisenhower was known for his work during World War II, among other things, okay? But if you back up, first of all, when Dwight was a kid, when Dwight grew up, he was born in Texas. His family then moved to Kansas. When they're in Kansas, they have a farm. This is their family photo from 1902, and this is when he's 12 years old. So the story I'm going to tell you is that the following year, but that's Dwight, that's his mom and dad, and then all the rest are his brothers. So Dwight is running on their farm in Kansas one day. He fell down and scraped his knee. It's kind of a passage for a boy. Like, you get up, you shake it off, you're fine. Except back in the early 1900s, there's no Neosporin. Right? There's no antiseptics, there's no antibiotics. So if you got a scrape and it got infected, it could be fatal. His scrape got infected, but he didn't want to tell mom. So Sunday morning, the family's getting up and going to church. The records say that he went to his mom and told his mom he didn't feel good. Mom said, okay, stay home from church. We'll check on you when we get back. It says the family left for church that morning. When they returned that night, they checked on him. Now, let me just point out, they left in the morning and returned at night. So I don't know how long church service went, but they were gone literally all day. They get back that night. They went upstairs to Dwight's room. Mom goes up, says she screamed. Dad runs up. Dwight was running a high fever. He was in and out of consciousness. He was in delirium. So mom screams, calls the doctor. Dad runs back to town, gets the doctor. The doctor comes out, and they don't know what's wrong yet because he never told his parents about the infection. So they start feeling, and the doctor was feeling, trying to figure out what's wrong, felt his leg, and his leg was incredibly swollen. So okay, let's take his pants off. His leg was so swollen, they had to cut his leg off. They had to cut his boot off. His foot was so swollen. The doctor looks, and his leg was purple and black. And it was going up his leg, up his thigh, and the doctor said that that infection reached his body, there's nothing I can do. So the only way I think we can save his life is to stop the infection. The only way I know to stop the infection is we have to amputate his leg. The doctor said, let me run back to town. I'm going to get my medical kit and my saw, and I'm going to come back and we'll take his leg. Dwight was conscious long enough to hear about the amputation and the saw, and he starts screaming. So as he's screaming, he starts yelling for his older brother, Edgar. Edgar, come in here, Edgar. So Edgar goes in the room, and what we know is that he and Edgar had a conversation. And you can imagine how this unfolds. He's a 13-year-old kid, and he's, I don't lose my leg. And Edgar's probably trying to talk to him. Hey, man, you're sick. The doctor's just trying to help. He wants to save your life. And Dwight is so insistent. He says, I would rather die than lose my leg. Like literally, I don't mind dying. I don't lose my leg. I'd rather die. He makes Edgar promise. So Edgar, as wanted to be a good older brother, says, okay, I won't let the doctor take your leg. Doc Conklin comes back, has a saw medical kit. He goes upstairs, and Edgar blocks the door. And the doctor says, Edgar, get out of the way. He says, sorry, Doc. I gave my word. You can't go in. And the report says that Edgar and the doctor argued back and forth. And it doesn't really say what they argued, but you can imagine, right? How did that go? The doctor's like, hey, dude, your brother's dying. I can save him. Sorry, doctor. No, Edgar, your brother literally is dying. I can save him, but you got to let me in. Sorry, doc. Edgar, if your brother dies, it will be your fault. I can save him. Like, imagine how this unfolds. And also, keep in mind, The records say nothing about the parents, which also makes me wonder, like, what were mom and dad doing in this moment? Like, this seems like a good moment for a parent to be like, son, get out of the door. What are you doing? No, get out of there. Edgar went out the doctor in. It says the doctor turned to leave frustrated. He threw up his hands in disgust and said, the only thing that'll save this boy's life now is a miracle. He slammed the door behind him. But when he said miracle, mom and dad had just come from church, right? Light bulb goes off, and they're like, we need to pray. So that night, mom, dad, and Edgar get around Dwight's bed, and they pray. Over the next 2 weeks, every morning and every evening, the family gathers around Dwight's bed, and every morning, every evening, they're praying for Dwight. They go throughout their day, they come back, but this is what they do. At the end of the first week, the swelling and the infection was going down, visibly. They could see the purple, the black was leaving his thigh, his legs getting smaller. At the end of 2 weeks, there's no mark. He's up, he's moving around, like everything is fine. They call the doctor, he comes back, says, I don't know what happened, it looks like a miracle, and they're like, yes, it's a miracle, awesome. Here's what's crazy about this. Dwight was the guy who was the leader in World War II, like the D-Day invasion strategy, which helped us win the war. This was Dwight's idea, right? Winston Churchill says that there's nobody like Dwight. He's the best, he's the brightest, whatever else. This was a huge idea to have Dwight be the commander of the Allied forces. Coming from Winston Churchill, Dwight was an amazing leader. But first of all, let me point out, had God not intervened in Dwight's life as a kid, if Dwight lost his leg, he's never going to enter the military. Which means he's not there in that moment to be the leader, to help bring freedom for the world. So this is a really big deal. At the end of the war, Dwight decides that he's going to run for political office. As he goes to run for political office, one of the things that happens is at that point, Republicans and Democrats, neither one really know what's going on. And this is almost like Donald Trump several years ago, where they're like, you should run our party, right? You should be our friend. And so nobody knows what side Dwight's going to be on. And as this happens, Dwight ends up coming out, and he's going to run for the Republican ticket. And so now all of a sudden the Democrats don't like him anymore, because at first they're like, you should run as a Democrat, you're awesome. So he finally runs, and can you click on that for me? Okay, so as he's running, he finally becomes the president of the United States, gets elected, and as president, one of the interesting things is, if you go back and read his journal, which is online, you can read, he says, before he was president, he wrote, I am afraid, looking at America, that America is becoming too secular, that we have forgotten who God is, which is not super surprising at the end of a lot of wars where there's been a lot of death, where there's been a lot of brokenness in families. There's a lot of hurt and pain in people's life. And he says, I'm afraid we're forgetting God. And he said, I want to help America remember who God is, because without God, America is never going to be successful. And so one of the things he did to help America remember God at his own inauguration, he said, I want to help Americans remember God. Here's part of what he did. You guys just listen to what he says.
Friends, before I begin the expression of those thoughts that I deem appropriate to this moment, would you permit me the privilege of uttering a little private prayer of my own? And I ask that you bow your heads. Almighty God, as we stand here at this moment, my future associates in the executive branch of government join me in beseeching that thou wilt make full and complete our dedication to the service of the people in this throng and their fellow citizens everywhere. Give us, we pray, the power to discern clearly right from wrong, and allow all our words and actions to be governed thereby and by the laws of this land. Especially we pray that our concern shall be for all the people, regardless of station, race, or calling. May cooperation be permitted and be the mutual aim of those who, under the concepts of our Constitution, hold to differing political faiths, so that all may work for the good of our beloved country and thy glory. Amen.
He led the nation in a prayer. And what he said before the prayer was, I want to help America remember who God is. That's awesome. Now, I also can tell you one of the cool things is we actually we have more than 120,000 original artifacts, documents, or reprints of such, and we actually own the original handwritten prayer from Dwight Eisenhower that he prayed at that inauguration. So one of the cool things, we own part of history, but this is Dwight wanting to help people remember God. Now, that's not all Dwight did as president.
Dwight's also the guy in 1953 who started the National Prayer Breakfast. He said that I want to make sure every year that our congressmen, our senators, our political officials, and even our friends from around the world can come and have a time to pray and remember God, that we can seek God's direction and handle what we're doing. Also, the following year, he was attending church, and it's very common back in those days, and actually for most of American history, that the presidents would attend a church in Washington, D.C., and the church he went to was one that many presidents had gone to before, and the Reverend George Dougherty was a Scottish minister who'd only been in America a couple of years. Dwight sat on the front row in his church, but the Reverend George Dougherty said that one day he was talking to his son after school and said, "Son, what was school like today?" And you can imagine, right? Father's on the son, he's like, "Dad, it's whatever." And he's like, "No, okay, son, tell me about school." And so he says, "Well, so we started off this morning with the prayer, and then we said the Pledge of Allegiance." And he said, "I'd never heard the Pledge of Allegiance at that point." So I said, "Son, what's the Pledge of Allegiance?" And again, fresh American coming in, at that point, we didn't have everybody learn the Pledge of Allegiance. So his son told him, "Well, I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, indivisible with liberty and justice for all." Because at that time, there was no under God in the pledge. And he heard it and he said, "I thought this could be the pledge to like a Soviet nation or a communist nation. There's nothing about this that makes it American." He said, "What makes America America is that we recognize God in America." He said, "And we should never have our kids pledging allegiance to a flag or a country that doesn't first submit itself to God. And if America doesn't submit itself to God, then," he just goes off on this. But what happens is, that following Sunday, he preaches a sermon. The sermon he preached was called Under God. Dwight's on the front row. And the entire sermon was about the Pledge of Allegiance and about how America needed to be a nation under God. And if America wasn't under God, then we should never pledge allegiance to her. At the end of this service, Dwight calls his cabinet around. He called congressmen and senators and said, "Hey, we got to make this happen." So they put legislation together. He signs it into law. He's the guy that gets under God added to the Pledge of Allegiance. And again, because the influence of a pastor recognizing we need to, as Americans, submit to God first and then to our nation, really great thought. He's also the guy who said we need a prayer chapel in the Capitol building. It is still there to this day. He took what was used to be essentially kind of like this cloakroom closet. And he said, no, we need a place where congressmen can go and they can see God's face, they can pray. And around it, there's a stained glass. And it's George Washington kneeling in prayer, Psalm 16:1. It says, "Preserve me, O God, for thee do I put my trust." So he says there needs to be a place where before every vote, the congressmen and senators can go and seek God and hear from God. He's also the guy that in 1956 put in "God we trust" on the currency. It had been put on some coins back under Abraham Lincoln, but it wasn't on all our currency. He says, no, it needs to be on everything we have in America. It needs to be "In God we trust" on our currency. He's also the guy who then made the national motto, "In God we trust." And all of this was part of his movement, and there's a lot of things we talk about with his presidency, but this was part of his movement when it started off when he said, "I want Americans to remember who God is." And part of what he said is that America's becoming too secular. Now, if he thought we were too secular back in the 50s, right, he'd be a little shocked to see where we are today. But this is the reality. When you look back at even a guy like Dwight, Dwight was not a perfect guy. Right? For sure. He was another guy who was jacked up and he's Jesus, because everybody is jacked up and he's Jesus. And yet it's unquestionable that God used him in really special ways. And we are dishonest to people and dishonest to history if we say we can't celebrate or honor somebody because they weren't perfect. But we're not celebrating and honoring their sin. We're celebrating and honoring how God used them to do great things. And what's significant about American history is so many times when God was using those people in America, what happens in America so often impacts and blesses the rest of the world. And God used them not just to advance America, but to advance civilization, society, equality, and to impact the rest of the world. And even looking at America, the fact that God so often would raise up so many of these leaders, I would argue there's a reason America's enjoyed more blessings than almost anywhere else. One of the things that David wrote in Psalms is, "Blessed is that nation whose God is the Lord." When a nation remembers God, the nation enjoys the benefits and blessings of remembering God. And this is something that in America, we are continually, remarkably like the Israelites, forgetting the God who has delivered and rescued and done miraculous things for us over and over and over. But my prayer is just like the Israelites, that God sends us, right? Give us grace, send us another leader, help raise up. But the fact that so many leaders who intentionally put God first is one of the reasons I think we've enjoyed so many levels of blessings for so many years, with more freedom, more stability, more prosperity. And this is where, in our nation's history, our nation is not a nation that's untarnished by sin. For sure, our nation's had wicked, sinful, evil moments.
But every time, I can point to people that God raised up to help put an end to those. And this is part of what is lost even in the modern narrative, which is actually one of the reasons that just a couple years ago, my dad and I started working on a new book called The American Story, where we start with Christopher Columbus. And we go from Columbus through roughly Abraham Lincoln, and we tell their story. Stories that are largely forgotten today when we just celebrated what should have been Columbus Day. And most of the world, it was Indigenous Peoples Day. Which, first of all, the question I want to know is, which Indigenous people are we celebrating? I feel like that makes a difference, right? Because like if in Texas, we talk about the Comanches, they weren't really nice people, right? The Aztecs, human sacrifice, like that, which I always like to know, because there certainly were some honorable Indian tribes, but to presume like all Indians were good and all white people bad, we've made some very vast generalized assumptions that are very inaccurate historically. Right? But this is the reality. We don't know the story. So when Columbus gets accused of being a bad guy, it's only because you don't know his story. Because if you know his story, what you realize is almost every accusation brought against him is a false claim that is historically unfounded and untrue. It is true he wasn't perfect. It is true he was a sinner who needed a savior. 100% true. But it's also true that just like in the days of Noah, where he was more honorable than those around him, Columbus was the most honorable navigator at any point up to that. Nobody did a better job, more honorable, treating natives, treating other people with respect. Columbus wouldn't let his men even take gold from the natives unless they exchanged something of value to them. He said, the natives don't appreciate gold, but you know it's valuable, but I don't want you to abuse them, so you can't take it without giving them something in return. The only people that Columbus ever enslaved were the people that he fought in justified warfare. And after you've conquered a people in justified warfare, there's only two options. In the 1400s, you kill them, or you enslave them. And by the way, the first tribe that he ever had problems with were the Caribs, known as the Caribbean, right where that word comes from. Also the Cannibs, where the word cannibal comes from. The first tribe he ever had trouble with, he left his men on an island. He went sailing, he came back, his men were dead, and they had been cannibalized. Literally, eaten. He shows up and he's like, what happened? Another Indian tribe came and they're like, dude, we saw the whole thing. It was them over there. Literally, the first tribe he had trouble with was after they cannibalized men. And people are like, well, Columbus committed genocide. Okay, a war is not genocide just because it's one-sided, right? And the reality is, you show up and some of your friends have been eaten, I think you're going on the warpath too. Okay, like we've divorced so much of the context and even the knowledge of the story to say Columbus is bad. But this is what we do. We go back and we say, here's the story. Here's what happened. He had 4 voyages. And so we just start with Columbus. We go through Jamestown and Plymouth. We go through the Pilgrims. All the way the story's up to Abraham Lincoln. We started this more than 3 years ago before even this shutdown cancel culture was even really the thing it is today. So we would argue as providentially that God allowed us to be documenting and telling these stories before we even knew that all these people needed to be defended on the level they're being defended today. But this is something that I would tell you. If you want to learn more about the American story, about how God used imperfect people and did something really special through them, it's a really fun way to learn that. We also have other resources. We're all over social media. You can follow us. We do new videos every single week. But I want to finish with a thought that I think is pertinent looking at the context of what we talked about, that God is not looking for perfect people because they don't exist. But he uses imperfect people for great things. We have an election coming up. And looking at this upcoming election, one of the things that's significant, the Bible tells us, Proverbs 14:34, that righteousness is what exalts a nation. Will you click on that for me? Oh, it came up. Never mind. So righteousness exalts a nation. As we are discussing what is the best path forward for America, what you can know is if your path forward does not include righteousness, it will not help America. This is a reality, okay? Because what makes a nation great is not just having a really great leader, it's a leader that enacts really good policies. Because it's righteousness that exalts a nation. Okay, and this is where I would point out what we have lost in modern culture is policy is more important than personality. There is a reason that people want to talk more about Donald Trump's tweets and him being mean than about his actual policies. That's significant because if you look at somebody's policies, we have never had a president who was more pro-life than Donald Trump. We have never had a president more in favor of religious freedom than Donald Trump. We have never had a president who's been a better friend to Israel than Donald Trump. And if you don't know the importance of Israel, go back and read Genesis 12, right? Where you stand in Israel makes a difference. Since Bill Clinton, every single president said, we're going to move the U.S. embassy to Jerusalem. Every single president since Bill Clinton. Donald Trump's the first one that did it. Donald Trump has helped navigate more peace deals in the Middle East than any president in the history of our nation. This dude is really jacked up and needs Jesus. Really. And yet, if you look in Hebrews 11, who God chooses for leaders, so often they are the messiest, the more broken, the sloppiest. The people in Hebrews 11 could not serve on staff at this church. Now, I mean, obviously we believe in grace and forgiveness, great, right? But you understand, like the reality, like no, we're not looking for those kind of people to mentor and work in kids ministry. Like, nope, that ain't gonna happen. And yet, that's the very kind of people that God, throughout Scripture, consistently used. He doesn't need the best in the sense of what is culturally defined as morality. But he takes what is often looked at as being the less. David, when Samuel went to find somebody, and Jesse's like, here's all my sons. You talk about a bad father, David carried on the bad legacy from his father. Because Jesse said, here's all my sons. Really? I mean, there's one more, but he's no good. Nobody likes him, and he would... Okay, nobody chose David except God. God used an imperfect person as something really special through them. And I'm just telling you, as a Christian, you have to know policy impacts righteousness much more than a personality does. If you look at the Bible, what was King David's personality like? You have no idea. You know why? Because the Bible doesn't tell us. All the Bible tells us is what he did and did not do. Even Jesus, you don't know what Jesus' personality was like. Was he an introvert or extrovert? You don't even know. He was with people all the time. He loved people, yes, but he always ran away from people to go by himself. He was tired of them. Right? I'm just telling you. Like, the Bible doesn't focus on personality, and yet we pretend like this is the most crucial thing. It's not. Personality is so far down the list. Policies impact righteousness more than anything else. And I'm not saying this just because I think Donald Trump is a better candidate, and it's not just because America, because sometimes people criticize, well, it's because you always promote America. Understand, if we were in Ethiopia, I'd be talking about our Ethiopian leaders. If we were in Guatemala, I'm talking about our Guatemalan leaders, right? When Jeremiah was taken into captivity as an Israelite, God told Jeremiah, pray for the peace in the land in which you are now dwelling. For when it goes well with the land, it will go well with you. Wherever you are, you should be praying for the leaders that God has over you, because the better job they do, the better it is for you. But the Bible also gives an indication of what better looks like. Righteousness is the better. How do we determine righteousness? It's not confusing when you look at the parties and the candidates. One is pro-life and one's not. One is pro-religious liberty and one is not. One is pro-Israel and one is not. It's not complicated. People pretend like this is a tough election. No. It's because you're focusing on somebody's personality, and that's not what determines righteousness. Right? I'm not choosing somebody who's my best friend to be president. I'm choosing somebody who's going to promote the most righteous policy, because that's what will continue to allow America to be the most stable, blessed, prosperous nation in the history of the world. And let me just tell you, every time there's been problems in our nation, what does God do? He raised up Christians. Now more than ever, we need Christians standing up, having the courage to speak out and say, here's truth, right? This is the way, walk ye in it. We got to, as Christians, stand up, because right now culture's confused. They don't even know what's true anymore. We don't even care what's true anymore. Christians are the only ones who actually know what's true, because we've been, right from the Word of God, we've been given truth, revealed truth to us from God and from the Bible. We have to stand up, and what is true is what helps our nation the most is righteousness. And right now, it's not confusing which candidate favors righteousness more than the other, which means even looking at this. The reason I love studying history, right? Because we can look historically and see people who were jacked up that God still used. I think very much we're going to look back in 10, 15, 20 years, and we're going to go, man, Donald Trump was one jacked up dude that God used for really great things. We've already seen a lot of really great things happen. And I'm believing that there will be 4 more years of really great things happening, and then maybe 8 years of Pence after that, right? But as Christians, don't get caught up and think personality is more important than policy. policy impacts righteousness more than anything else. As Christians, we promote righteousness. Jesus said, Sermon on the Mount, right? Matthew 5:6. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. Matthew 6:33. Seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and everything else will be added unto you. Righteousness is always God's priority. As Christians, that needs to be our priority too when we look at elections. Vote for righteousness, not for personalities. Thank you guys for letting me share, and David, I'll turn it back over to you.